Hey, good folks. Welcome to Psychology Noir. Dr. Lund here. Today, folks, what I want to do is take a look at Bryan Kohberger. As most of you know, he's the man who was arrested for allegedly killing the students in Idaho and was recently indicted by the grand jury. He was indicted for 1 count of burglary and 4 counts of first-degree murder. And we were able to sit in on the live stream this past week when the judge went through the counts as well as the penalty for each count. And we also got to see that when the judge asked if he pled guilty or not guilty, his attorney had stood up and said that he stands silent, which basically means the judge then entered a not guilty plea to all the counts against him. Now, there are really some good legal channels that have gone into the details of the legal aspect of him not pleading and the judge entering a plea of not guilty and what could that mean, etc., etc. Channels like The Lawyer That You Know, Emily D. Baker, just to name a few. However, what I'm most interested in about Bryan Kohberger is just some of the information that have been in the press since his arrest back in December. Some of the tidbits of information, such as him being horribly made fun of as a child, being obese, and then actually losing 100 pounds in response to being made fun of and not being part of, especially by girls, when he was younger and going to school. Most of the interviews of people who knew him from school or from his past described him as being very awkward socially. Some female friends had described that he stared at them and they had just thought to themselves, that's just Bryan being Bryan. Again, very socially awkward with, it sounds like, both males and females. It was being reported that he was also asked not to come back to a certain bar because of being inappropriate with women, staring at them and asking them inappropriate personal questions. Also, it was reported that during the time that he was a teaching assistant, he had complaints against him from some of the women students about that he was tougher on them or inappropriate, more on the angry side rather than being sexually inappropriate, as well as other students in the class, including males, saying that he graded them extremely harshly, at a very different level than you would expect for an undergraduate class. A woman he had met on Tinder and had a date with reported that she felt very uneasy with him. He was somewhat inappropriate by tickling her, and when she confronted him, he became very serious. Again, very odd behavior, to the point where she went into the bathroom and pretended like she was throwing up so that he would leave, which in fact he did. Even watching the video of his interaction with a female police officer who stopped him for running a red light, and this was prior to the murders, his challenge of him being stopped was controlled yet polite. However, you can almost sense a tension and a challenging of the decision that the cop made to stop him, and whether he was trying to talk himself out of a ticket or whatever he was doing. It seemed that he was almost insulted that this woman cop had stopped him. Now, I don't know if it would have been the same interaction with a male police officer, but it seemed to me that he was very intensely trying to control himself by being polite. So, with all this pathological dysfunction with relationships, especially with relationships with women, at least from what has been reported, is Bryan Kohberger an incel? Now, for those who don't know, or this is new, the term incel means involuntary celibate. It really refers to a loosely defined online subcultures of individuals, predominantly men, who claim to be unable to find romantic or sexual relationships despite all their attempts. Incels typically harbor feelings of frustration, anger, and resentment toward women and society at large, often blaming especially women for their perceived lack of success in relationships and dating. Now get this, the term incel was initially coined by a Canadian woman who created a website in the late 1990s to discuss her own experiences of being involuntary celibate. And over time, an online communities dedicated to discussing involuntary celibacy started to emerge and provided a platform for individuals to share their frustrations and seek support from each other who could relate to their experiences. Now, here's the disclaimer. Not all individuals who identify as incels exhibit any kind of harmful or violent behavior, or the vast majority of people who experience involuntary celibacy don't associate with the incel community and don't adopt their extremist views. Although a number of the forums and websites were banned in 2017 because of the violent nature, there still continues to be a distinguishing characteristic of the incel community that's prevalent of misogyny and the belief in a rigid hierarchy of attractiveness. Many incels adhere to a system known as the black pill, which asserts that physical appearance is the primary determinant of success in dating and relationships. They often resent individuals they perceive as more physically attractive, labeling them as Chads for the males and Stacys for the females. Now, there have been incidences where individuals associated with the incel community have committed acts of violence, including mass shootings and acts of terrorism. This is Elliot Rodger. He killed 6 people in a stabbing and shooting spree in California in May of 2014 because he said he wasn't able to get women to like him or have sex with him. From my point of view, looking at his manifesto, this young man had no idea how to engage in adult relationships and was clearly stuck in a very juvenile pattern of thinking that the world owed him. Clearly, these groups suffer from the same juvenile perspective. Elliot Rodger killed himself after his rampage. To some in the incel community, Rodger became somewhat of a hero, being referred to as either the father of incels or known as the supreme gentleman. Now, how this may be related to Bryan Kohberger is that after the murders of the Idaho Four, there was an individual making Reddit posts about the murders, as well as a post that talked about the person leaving a sheath at the scene that had not been released by the police at that time. So there is a large question about, was in fact Papa Rodger actually Bryan Kohberger, who was commenting and had this information about the sheath that was left at the scene. So if it's discovered, and I guess we'll find out at the trial when that happens, so if it's discovered that Bryan Kohberger was using the name Papa Rodger, that to me would indicate that there is a connection with Kohberger and the incel community. Again, he seems to fit the profile of awkwardness with women, hating women, and being socially awkward. In April 2018, Alec Manassian, a self-proposed incel, drove a van into pedestrians in Toronto, Canada, killing 10 people and injuring several others. In a Facebook post prior to the attack, he referred to the attack as a rebellion against women who had rejected him and praised Elliot Rodger. In November of 2018, Scott Beerley, another self-identified incel, opened fire at a yoga studio in Tallahassee, Florida. 2 women were killed and several others were injured before Beerley fatally shot himself. But prior to the shooting, Beerley had expressed misogynistic views online, blaming women for his lack of success in relationships. Now, basically, there's no official organization or hierarchy for incels. The community is primarily an online subculture rather than a formal, organized group. It lacks a central leadership structure or any specific set of guidelines that all members adhere to. However, even though it has a lack of formal organization, it doesn't diminish the impact or influence that the incel community has on some of its members that really ascribe to the violence and hatred and misogyny of women. And also, just to be clear, incel is not a recognized diagnosis within the field of mental health or psychology. As I said, it's a term that originated online in platforms and refers to individuals who see themselves as self-identified involuntary celibates. From what I see so far, just in my opinion, Bryan Kohberger certainly has the traits of what people would determine as an incel, with his extreme inappropriate social behavior, his icy stare, lack of bonding with other people, and possibly a violent nature if he is in fact guilty of the murders of the 4 Idaho students. He certainly can be and will be the new face of the incel. So tell me what you think about Kohberger and possibly him being an incel. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.